really good to see such an audience still staying until the later panels. So really glad to have you all here. We're going to really talk in this panel about a variety of sectors and how Tech for Good can actually flesh out across different sectors and how it actually can be interpreted in different ways as well. So we'll be talking about that very shortly. But first of all, I'll introduce the panelists very quickly, and then they'll tell you a bit more about how they got into Tech for Good and what their companies are actually doing in this space. So I'll start just towards the end with Boaz. So Boaz is the Senior Relationship Manager at Prodigy Finance. It's a company that helps students finance their studies, and actually 80% of their customers, of the students, are from emerging markets, financing studies, I guess, often in the UK or in countries like this one. So welcome, Boaz. Next up, we have David. David Jackson. He's the head of marketing at Winner Solutions. They're in the food sector, and they're basically helping chefs reduce food waste. So making kitchens more efficient, save money, and reduce food waste. Welcome. And then we have Sims Witherspoon from Google. So she's the product marketing lead for crisis response at Google. And she's also managing a product called SOS Alerts, which she will tell us a bit more about shortly. And then we have Tamsin Chislett from Clearly So. And you're the head of impact research and innovation, so welcome as well. So if we start with you, Tamsin, can you tell us a bit more about why are you in the Tech for Good sector? How did you get in there? And what is Clearly So's role in that sector? What are you doing?
Sure. Hi, everybody. This mic's working, isn't it? My name's Tamsin. Really nice to meet you all. I'm not sure I'm in the Tech for Good sector, which is a good start. But I work for a company called Clearly So. It's breaking. Can I switch? Yeah, I'll let you sort that. Is that one better? That sounds better to me as well. Brilliant. I got some waves at the end. Thank you. So I work for a company called Clearly So. We are an impact investment firm. So we help impact businesses to raise capital and provide corporate finance advice. And the vast majority of those are technology businesses, hence being invited along today. My role there is head of impact research and innovation. So I run a new business unit that is focused on helping mainstream venture capital and private equity investors to assess their social and environmental impact. We launched about a year ago, and our largest customer is Octopus Ventures, who are one of the largest VCTs in the UK. And we're working with them to assess the impact of their 60 or so investee companies, which are all technology-based, hence, again, Tech for Good. In terms of how I got into it, I started life as a management consultant at Bain, which feels a really world away now, which is great. And I took a kind of left field turn straight after that. I moved to Uganda for a couple of years and worked for some impact businesses out there. Came back and joined a tech startup because it felt like everyone else had, and I should find out what it was like. And then found my way into Clearly So, and am now very much committed to a career mixing profit with purpose.
Nice. Hi everyone, I'm Sims. I work for Google. I think some of you have heard of that company, so I won't give a big intro of everything that they do. I work specifically within our crisis response division, which spans a few organizations within the company. It spans product, partnerships, people with our volunteer group, and also philanthropy, so google.org, who gives a lot of our grants. I exist in the product space, so I hope that's what you guys are interested in hearing about today. As Michael mentioned, I'm the product marketing lead for SOS Alerts, which is a feature of Google Search and Google Maps, and soon to be other core products that aggregates crisis content from across the web, from reliable, trusted sources, as well as other Google products, to serve timely, relevant content to people who are experiencing or interested in a natural or man-made crisis. As far as how I got into it, I was a Mandarin Chinese major in school, and I went into consulting as well in Shanghai as a risk management consultant. I got interested in crisis back then and was hired by Google out of China. We didn't have a China department then, so I moved to California, started as an analyst for them, worked my way into strategy and then to social impact strategy, and then was hired and moved from California to London about 2 years ago once we decided to start building SOS. So was part of the original team that started that process.
Hi everyone. So my name's David. I'm from Winnow. We help chefs run more profitable and sustainable kitchens by developing digital tools for chefs to better understand the food that they're throwing away and therefore cut that food waste in half. So why does that make us a tech for good company, I guess? Well, food waste is a pretty big global problem. A third of all of the food that we produce worldwide ends up being wasted. And if food waste was a country, it would be the biggest emitter of greenhouse gases after America and China. About $100 billion worth of food is wasted in the hospitality sector, which is where we focus every year. Now, you can see that as a really big problem. But in Tech for Good, and in particular in kind of startups in Tech for Good, we tend to see those as opportunities. So that's $100 billion that we could claw back as a market by introducing new technologies and new techniques to help businesses become more efficient. So I head up marketing. It's my job to, I guess, do two things. One is to grow the market and introduce a new technology to chefs, which is a pretty difficult challenge in itself. And then the second is to build demand and a pipeline of business for our company. In terms of how I got into this, I've always been a kind of marketeer. I started off at The Guardian, then American Express. I then decided I didn't really want to sell credit cards, and I did marketing and communications in the not-for-profit sector for about 10 years. Then I left that. I went into, I moved to Kenya, started a business in Kenya, and then came back and found Winnow. So that's a bit about me.
Cool. Hi, everyone. My name is Boaz Velkin. I work for Prodigy Finance. As Maiko mentioned, we provide loans to international students for MBAs and other top masters. We lend to over 118 countries. We work across 250 universities globally. And to date, we've funded over 9,000 students, equal to about $410 million. We're very much for-profit, but mission-led. And the main concept is that, financing shouldn't be a barrier to education, and more broadly than that, it shouldn't be so hard to move across borders and get access to financial products. So that's a little bit more about Prodigy. A bit more on the funding side, we raise funds from impact investors, so family offices, alumni, high net worth individuals who are interested in funding education and getting a financial return and a social return. And a little bit more about myself. So as you can probably tell, I'm from South Africa, where we've got tons of social problems. So when I was growing up, always a little bit more acutely aware of trying to see what we can do for good. Having a Jewish mother, she always wanted me to be an accountant, a lawyer, or a doctor. So naturally, I started studying humanities when I went to university. And basically, I did some internship work at a social private equity company, thought I was going to go into banking, and then decided that fintech was more for me. And that's how I sort of stumbled into Prodigy Finance. So I didn't really sort of have a career plan to get into tech for good. Probably like most of us, we kind of just stumbled into it.
All right, thanks very much. The first topic I want to discuss with you guys, and probably this event shows as well that there's really a rise of tech for good and more attention coming on that topic and on the sector tech for good, right? And that's really a bit, from my perspective, really the evolution of traditional business and having impact and making business was very separate. Evolution to, okay, maybe business should also donate a little bit of their profits, to really now, okay, how can business really combine impact and profit? And it's basically the part of the same thing, or just an outcome of operating the business. So under that aspect, my question to you guys would really be how you guys look at it, and specifically, does focusing on impact in your jobs at your companies, does it make business sense? Is it something that's regarded as separate? Is it something that's regarded as integral? And maybe if we start with Sims for Google, right? Google is a very mission-driven business, probably. Everybody, if you speak to a Googler, you'll hear them talk about their mission to make information accessible, right? but you wouldn't say it's only like a social impact business, right? It's not as narrow as that, right? So how does Google think about that? Is this like some nice CSR stuff that you do, or is that really something that's integral to what Google is, or does it make business sense in the end for Google to do what you're doing for Google?
Yeah, absolutely. So as Michael mentioned, Google's mission is to organize the world's information, make it universally accessible and useful. During a crisis, we are acutely aware that information is of utmost importance. It can be the difference between life and death sometimes. And so if we are to stay really true to our mission, then we need to be there with that information when people need it, arguably, when they need it the most. And so that's why we started to build SOS alerts, because it was core to our mission. We saw that during a crisis, we weren't as quick, to serve as to make that information as accessible as quickly as possible. A user would have to do a couple of searches in order to find out what's going on, where it's going on, and how bad it is. And so essentially that's what we developed SOS to answer, is those three questions. You find out top stories, you find out updates from local governments and authorities, you find police hotlines. In some instances, if English is not the first language that's spoken in the affected area, you'll find useful translations. So that was our attempt to make all of that information as accessible as quickly as possible. I think if you look outside products, SOS is a feature of our products, specifically search and maps right now. More to come, and look across the rest of the company too. You see that we are very aware of social impact and driven by a similar mission. With people, we have a volunteer program that pairs skilled Googlers with these, crisis situations. Obviously, when it's safe for them to go in, if they have a particular skill that would help an affected area, such as a software engineer who's able to help set up Wi-Fi connectivity in an area, we will send them in as part of our program, along with grants that we give to NGOs who are helping first responders and operate on the front lines of a crisis. Those guys are the real heroes. We hope to be a platform for the local authorities, the NGOs, the first responders, the people who are actually in charge of keeping these communities safe and put their lives on the front lines. We're just hoping to be a useful tool for them to do their jobs.
Mm-hmm. All right. Maybe Boaz, a question to you. Do you ever see yourself in your daily work trying to make trade-offs between impact and profitability of what you do? Like, could you make a higher impact if you weren't for profit, or how do you balance it, or is it really does it go hand in hand for you?
So it's obviously a super interesting question. As I mentioned, I'm not sure if I mentioned, but we've raised money from Index Ventures and Boulderton Capital. So those are some serious VCs, and with that, we've sort of scaled from a small office to now 140 people in New York and London, and we've hired a bunch of ex-bankers, and we have people who come from the impact world. There's sort of that healthy tension between the two sides. So fundamentally, we are looking to be sustainable. We want to make money for shareholders and our investors, but we do want to make an impact. So there is definitely a trade-off between the two. And let's say we expand and we want to do credit cards for international immigrants, or if you move from the US to the UK, it's tough to get a mortgage without a credit history. While we sort of grow the company, there's still underlying impact there. But on top of that, there's a lot of people in the company that are very passionate about more on the impact side. So they look to do sort of side projects. So for example, and I'm not trying to oversell Prodigy here, but we launched a fellowship this year for MBAs to pursue a social impact internship over the summer. So that has nothing to do with sort of our core lending business, but that's just an example of some of the social impact initiatives that sort of run in the company. So there's a bit of both sides for sure.
All right. David, how about you guys? I hear you, and I think if you go to your website as well, it's mainly about cost savings. So you really show the case, the financial case to be made for your customers. But obviously, you're also a profit-driven business. You're a business that has raised investment and wants to return money to shareholders, right? How do you think about that, impact versus profit?
So Winnow was founded about 4.5 years ago here in London, and it was founded as a as a technology business rather than a charity, because the founders thought that this was the best way to scale a solution quickly for a global problem. And the way, obviously, that businesses have to kind of meet the challenges required to scale is that they have to create value for their customers, they have to create value for their investors, and also for their employees. It's completely integral that when we deliver impact, we're also delivering value as well. So to kind of paint you guys a picture, imagine a big staff restaurant, maybe a university canteen, actually. It's very difficult to measure the food that's being thrown away. And what we find is that between about 5, 10, up to 15, or even in some cases 20% of all the food that's being purchased is being wasted. And nobody's measuring that, and nobody's looking after that. And when we put in place our digital tools to help chefs quickly and accurately measure that food waste, they can typically cut that food waste in half. So on a very low margin business, you could be looking at cutting your food costs by 5-7%. That can be really transformational for a business. And it's for that reason that we've been able to scale quite quickly. So 4.5 years ago, kind of MVP in a staff restaurant, lots of kind of wires and stuff coming out of it. Now we're in 30 countries. We have VC investment to help us scale. We have offices in Dubai, in Singapore, in Shanghai, and launching in other markets over the course of the year. So for us, it's very much integral. That said, tech for good is very segmented. There's some areas where technology can do some great things, and it doesn't need to have a financial proposition at the heart of it. So I don't think there's any one single answer in this, and obviously what you guys will hear today is as many different facets of technology for good. But it's certainly in the kind of startup space, you need to be creating some value for your customers and your shareholders.
I think you really have a good view of both sides, right? You're working with investors, you're working with startups or companies seeking to raise money, and obviously you're having to explain to investors why it makes sense to invest in impact-driven companies. Yeah. Why does it make sense to invest in impact-driven companies? Is there anything like a trade-off between profit and impact? And if there is, why would I even invest in an impact-driven company?
Yeah, sure. Happy to answer the trade-off question in the politest possible way. The question drives me nuts. The reason it drives me nuts is because the answer, I think, is very simple, which is sometimes, and it depends. People get really hung up on this idea that you either have to always have impact and financial return aligned, or you can never have it. In fact, maybe you shouldn't ever have it. That's a really bad thing. And our view is that you need to be intelligent about which problems there is a clear correlation between the two and which ones actually there isn't. So Clearly So likes to prove that you can make really good money by companies, and I think there's some sectors where that is being particularly true at the moment. So we do an awful lot of stuff related to the transition to a low carbon economy and environmental changes. We work with a lot of ed tech companies, a lot of health tech companies, a lot in sustainable supply chains. All of those have fantastic commercial opportunities where there's a lot of value to be created. But then we also work with companies that provide affordable housing, or work with vulnerable homeless people, or autistic young people who haven't found work yet. And they're really thorny problems where getting a market return out of a commercial business tackling those problems is tough. And so our view is you just need to be upfront about what you are planning to do in terms of your return. And I think it was Vaughan Williams from Leapfrog earlier who said it best, which is just be ready to have all the tools at your disposal to fix these social problems. And I'm actually curious, am I allowed to ask a question?
Yeah, of course.
I was curious because Google, I assume, doesn't make money from the crisis work that you do, right? So that is a problem where you've realized you've got the tools to solve it, but there's not a commercial gain. Yeah.
It's great. Our division is supported by other business around Google, and our group is basically, because we can, we should, is why we exist.
Got it. Thanks. Thank you.
All right. And that's inspired mainly by the mission, Google's mission, or tell me a bit more about that. Because we can, we should. Why does Google
Yes, it's inspired by our mission. We felt like in order to make that mission completely true, we needed to be there when people need us the most. So given the importance of information and access to resources during a crisis, so I work in crisis response, obviously, so I'm thinking about that social good application of our technologies and our products. But because we had the tools to get information to a huge user base and connect local authorities to the people who use Google tools, we wanted to be able to do that. You know, not everyone knows that if something were to happen in London, the Met Police publish information on their website and through Twitter. And I think a lot of people's inclination is maybe to call a friend or go to social media. But the thing about that is that the information coming from local authorities is going to be your most relevant, actionable, safest information in order to make informed decisions about keeping you and your loved ones safe. So we want to put that information out on a huge platform. So that's what's accessible to people when they use our tools.
Mm-hmm. One topic, obviously, we have an audience of MBAs here, and we have a few different sectors here on stage, right? So we have finance, we have food, we have tech, I guess, right? So different sectors that you can go into. What would be your advice to anybody here in the audience that might be willing to go into different sectors but wants to do something with tech for good? Like, should they just first get some experience in the sector in general and then focus on tech for good, or look straight away for the tech for good? And how did you do it? Did you just end up in tech for good, or did you initially, was that always your priority, like tech for good, and strategize from the very beginning after your graduation and go for it? Or what would you be advice on that?
Who wants to start?
Who wants to start?
So I went through this process, but it wasn't to go into tech for good. It was initially to go into NGOs and the not-for-profit sector. And I went to see a guy who used to be the CEO of the Red Cross. And he said to me, I can remember it really clearly, it's about 12 years ago, and he said, you don't have anything to offer. And I said, yeah, but I want to do something really good. And he was pretty blunt, and he said, listen, you need to go and you need to get some skills and you need to take those to the NGO sector. And I think, depending on where anybody would like to go, that's not bad advice to follow into technology for good. So, what are you bringing to that business? And a lot of these businesses are small and the people in them don't have a lot of time. And so then how can you bring that skill to the conversation that you have as a kind of starter? So for example, I'd love it if somebody came to me and said, hey, I've been on your website and I can find 5 things that will get you, more conversions. I'd love to have a chat with you about that for half an hour. That's a really good conversation for me to have, and that's really valuable. So I guess my point would be, well, what is your skill? What skills can you go and develop? And then how can you take that into technology for good?
Yeah, I'll piggyback on that and say that developing an expertise, I think, is incredibly important, and then applying it to social impact, social good, tech for good, whatever sector you decide to go into that. It's all in the similar grouping. But I think a lot of us end up coming from consulting or end up being really good generalists, myself included, from consulting. And it's not until later in your career that you decide what your expertise is really going to be. And I think in crisis response, to David's point, or in social good in general, if you can bring an expertise and apply it to something that you really care about, that puts you leaps and bounds above other people who are trying to go into the same thing.
Just to add, I think it's just to be super strategic with your search. Email directly to companies with an idea of how you can improve it. Look at portfolio of companies of big VCs or some of the social impact funds that you see here. Go see who they invest in. Email every single one of them if you want. Don't just go to your careers team and just hope for something to fall into your lap. It's all going to be you reaching out to your contacts on LinkedIn or directly reaching out to companies. Or if you have a good idea, just go and start it. I mean, I think LBS gets a big allocation of entrepreneurship visas in the UK. So there's probably 20 available or something like that. So if you're from Oxford or from Cambridge as well in the audience, a lot of the top schools in the UK have the same sort of similar allocation. You do need to get funding for that business, but if you have a good idea, go chat to to your careers team about that, and go start it yourself, or more broadly, really just put yourself out there and just go for coffee chats with interesting businesses and see if they have anything for you, not just in London, but it's easy to be interviewed virtually across the world. Companies like AngelList, you can search for remote work opportunities, you can filter by visa sponsorship. There's amazing resources out there to get involved.
I just want to disagree slightly with the get expertise before you go and join Tech for Good. I think happily that's changing a bit. So obviously I went into consulting first, and it's great, you learn a lot and you can pay off some student debt, and that's very helpful. But I think the world has changed, and it's become much more acceptable to learn by doing and get thrown into a startup and learn by just doing a project and seeing what happens. And that was probably less the case 10 years ago when I started work. And that opens up a world of Tech for Good projects. And I think we probably need some sort of like sector-wide capacity building, because you do maybe miss out on some of the training that you'd get at some of the big, more commercial, less for good focused firms. But I would say just hurry up and get involved, because the sector's growing really fast and needs loads of smart people like you. So.
You took the first step by coming here, so very good. I just see we have a bunch of questions from the audience already, so let's jump right into the stuff that you guys are most interested in. One question we have for Sims, actually. What was the process for justifying establishing crisis response within Google and for it to be funded from other business areas? Was it like hard to lobby for, or how did the process work?
Yeah, that's easy. No, it wasn't hard at all. Our executives, because we provided a rationale that said this is our mission, as it pertains to crisis response, we are not fulfilling our mission. That was kind of the end of the conversation. The next thing was how many people and how much money do you need? And that was what I got busy doing right after that. But no, they were really supportive from the very beginning.
You want to work for a company like that, that goes straight in. All right. Then we have a question to everybody, whoever can answer it. What skills are you looking for over the next 5 to 10 years to support the Tech for Good space? So if somebody wants to go into Tech for Good, what skills are needed? I think it says MBA or otherwise. I guess the question is, should people do the MBA or not? I think you're already in it, so I think in the panel we might not have any MBA here, right? So, but in general, what are the skills that are needed?
I mean, I think it just depends on your background as well. As like if you've worked in a big corporate and you want to move into a small, let's say, social impact minded tech companies, like how do you deal with ambiguity? How do you deal with fast-paced environment? How do you deal when there's no structure, there's no process, it's absolute chaos? Do you enjoy that? Is that interesting for you? Can you like build, can you justify why you want to enter that space? I think a lot of people just think, oh, because you worked in a big company, now you want to move into a smaller company, then you've got that brand name on your CV and it's going to be easy. So it's like really, how do you sell yourself well in terms of the interview in that area particularly? I think beyond skills is probably the jobs that we'll be doing in 25 years don't even exist yet, if we're not like enslaved by robots. But I mean, it's just more of, can you learn how to learn? I think will be a big skill for the future roles in this space.
I don't know if I can speak for the whole sector, but from a startup perspective, just getting stuff done, I think, is something that we really look for. So, as we recruit from big business where, putting together a beautiful deck for 3 months that's, absolutely perfect and watertight, that's not very helpful for us. Perfect isn't important. But as you're growing quickly and as you're moving fast, actually just getting stuff done and then moving on to the next one is a skill, a kind of capability that we really look for.
I would say the top one for me would be communication. Learn how to communicate effectively and learn how to be a good translator. The social good sector in general, you'll work with a lot of, nonprofits, you'll work with governments, you'll work with local authorities, and applying tech to that. Sometimes they don't speak the same language. They work on different timelines at different paces. And if you can be the person who brings the conversation into a single language that everyone speaks onto a timeline that everyone can agree upon and keep them moving forward and everyone aware of what's going on, you're going to be successful in this area. I think communication is too often considered just a soft skill, and I think it's one of the most important skills for every single person on a team working on this to have.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And when I think about some of the commonalities of Tech for Good projects, maybe to echo a bit of what Boaz said as well, usually it requires thinking about cutting edge technology and applying it to a problem that's not been tackled before. So a level of just determination and ingenuity and persistence will help you. And when you think about it, that's kind of the opposite of what you learn at a lot of big companies, where it's all about repeatable models and being able to use the same tools multiple times in slightly different tweaked environments. Whereas if you really want to solve a problem that matters, you probably are starting from quite a blank sheet of paper, and it's really hard work. So I think, that's probably one of the common themes that I would pull out.
Tamsin, we got a question, another one for you. So the question is, could blended finance address some of the compromises that might need to be made between profit and purpose?
Yes. That's the main answer. Yes. No, absolutely. I think we see it as a really big growth area for Clearly So over the next couple of years. To be honest, it's not, we haven't done too much of it so far, but I think we will. And it reminds me of the panel earlier when they were talking about leapfrogging ideas where actually they've really been developed in emerging markets and now being pulled back to developed markets. And blended finance is one of those, where mixing investors looking for a market return with grant funders, with people partway in between, has been going on for a while now to tackle emerging market problems, but less so in the UK. And I think it'll be an exciting area for us.
There's another question that looks quite interesting. It's basically around what technology. Well, no, it just disappeared. What technology will drive the most good in your sectors? So what do you believe, if the robots don't kill us, are those the robots?
So
what technology will drive the most good in your
So provided AI
sector?
doesn't overtake everything, which was a joke, by the way, everyone. It's a joke. In terms of technology, something I'm really, really passionate about is definitely blockchain within the fintech space. And arguably that's like real fintech is... particularly a lot of companies out there are looking to solve like cross-border identity issues. Uport is an example of that, helping refugees basically better be able to buy food in refugee camps is one user case of that. Global credit scoring, there's a company called Bloom that's doing that. Just generally blockchain to bring more and more people into the unbanked because you can lower costs and really leverage. It's basically the wild west of tech and finance, so it's going to be an interesting next 5 years.
I think so kind of sticking to hospitality and food and what we do, not a technology in itself, but kind of concepts around big data are really interesting for us. So, right now we're capturing one source of data in what's being thrown away, but overlaying other sources of data on top of that, like, if we're working with someone like IKEA, for example, could we pull in things like traffic data and become more predictive? And so those are some really interesting questions that we're still getting to grips with, and that's kind of quite interesting from us from a commercial perspective.
And for us, I think access to technologies that give access to information, access to connectivity. I think in the social good space, and particularly in crisis response, having that access, being able to be online, being able to get information in order to make informed decisions is incredibly important.
I think for impact investors like us, that it's any technology which increases the level of transparency about where people's money is invested. So I think as it becomes easier and more possible to see where your pension fund pot or your stocks and shares are, and also easier to see what those companies are doing, whether that's through blockchain tracking supply chains or Glassdoor telling you what it's like to work there, or all these different platforms. Just greater transparency on corporate behavior, and then greater transparency on where your investors' money is going. And that's going to hopefully drive drive people to demand more of businesses as a result.
Another question on skills came in actually, and the question is there a baseline understanding of technology, coding frameworks, UX, UI knowledge required for people to go into the tech for good sector? Is that needed?
I mean, I don't think so. Obviously, if you want to do a technical job, you want to be a coder, you want to be an engineer, software engineer, you're going to need to know how to code. But if you want a non-technical role, I don't think that is important. You can get domain expertise. To Timur's point earlier, learn as you go. You can get it on the job, and you can apply a lot of different skills that are non-technical to this space.
Anybody thinks you definitely need to know how to code to get to Tech for Good? No? All right, good. Next question. So one for Sims as well. How do you tailor man-made crisis events to highlight what a crisis, what's a crisis and what's not a crisis? So how does Google actually decide what's a crisis and what's not? It's like they're like one guy or girl sitting on a button, or like how do you analyze that?
Oh, that would be, what a terrible job that would be. No, so we use a variety of different factors to decide what to respond to. It's going to be a combination of the impact, obviously, the number of people affected, the access to information, that's the availability of information in the area, Wi-Fi connectivity, mobile connectivity, obviously also Google's specific ability to provide some kind of positive impact. If we don't think we can add to the conversation, we don't want to be creating extra noise. And so it's a combination of those things. When all of those things are high, it's our mark for activation.
Mm-hmm. All right. I think we have 3 minutes left, so let's focus on the next one. There is a question around, if you think about the big global issues that we're facing, which of these issues do you think desperately needs a good tech for good solution to it that's currently not addressed yet? There's not currently a good solution yet. Do you have anything in mind that is a global problem that doesn't really seem to be a good solution for it yet?
Good question.
I mean, there's a bunch of problems out there, obviously, and there's a lot of people trying to solve interesting challenges. I think a lot of, particularly in this space with the public sector, there's a lot of interesting stuff. The way that governments interact with their citizens, whether paying bills or voting. There's some interesting companies that could be built to improve the way that you. Going back to blockchain, there's some companies trying to build international voter registries and stuff like that, but that's in maybe very few countries. So taking that back and just bringing more and more people in to the system, particularly healthcare records is another one. The healthcare system in general is very centralized, and it's very expensive to move information across. So once again, going back to blockchain, anything in that space would be super applicable.
So I think the statistics, something like by 2030 or 2050, we have to increase our global food production by 50%. And obviously we can increase our productivity by not wasting it. But there's some real challenges around how we grow enough food. And one area that I'm just really interested in is ag tech. I think there's some really interesting developments around vertical farming that's happening right now using AI. And fundamentally, if we're going to, maintain and grow as a species, we need to be able to feed each other. So for me, that's a really interesting space to keep an eye on.
For me, this is personal, not a Google answer. But I think climate change, there are a lot of things that are being done for that, but none of them that are really making the impact that we need to be having, specifically with regards to our use of maybe overuse of energy. So I think optimizing that would really have an impact on the world we live in.
I'll share a personal interest as well, which I've already mentioned slightly, but it's supply chains. I think in an era where we feel like the world has shrunk a lot and you can contact somebody in a different country so easily and you can spread information so rapidly. I think it's astonishing that we can buy most stuff from a shop and have absolutely no idea where it came from or who made it or under what conditions or from what materials. And I think there's some really interesting companies in that space, but there's so much more work to do.
Very interesting. Okay, I just learned we have a bunch of more time, so that's good. We'll go through the rest of the questions. So the top-rated question right now, so feel free to submit a few more. Let's see how many we get through. The top-rated question right now is, what's your biggest challenge as a company for each of yours to establish yourself in the target market? I guess not so much for Google to establish yourself as the search engine, but maybe everybody else.
So what's the biggest challenge? So for us, anybody who's worked in hospitality will know it's a fairly traditional place to work. People are fairly entrenched in kind of traditional ways of doing things. And so for us to change the mindset of chefs who have been taught to produce and actually have been taught to overproduce is something that's really challenging for us. And working with really big businesses, so we work with some of the biggest food businesses in the world, changing those massive organizations and introducing a totally new way of thinking is really challenging. The way that I approach that is from a marketing perspective. How can we get chefs doing the talking? The way that we see ourselves is for a platform for chefs to communicate and share with their communities the impact that they're having. And so for us, that's what we're working really hard to kind of get out of the way and let the chefs that use Winnow to tell their story.
Probably for us, we sort of went global day one, which poses some interesting challenges, dealing with different contexts and cultures, and the way that people view financial products in India is very different to the UK and the US. So how do you have a scalable platform that speaks to all of those sort of cultures has been an interesting challenge for us. Probably the biggest challenge right now a little bit is we receive loan repayments from various countries. We lend to 118 countries. So it's quite easy to use your card to pay for an Uber or an Airbnb, but that's just a normal transaction through your debit card or credit card. But a loan repayment can't really fit into that system. So a lot of people working at Prodigy to absolutely get that perfect. And while we do receive payments from all those countries, there's definitely a lot of scope to improve that. And that's definitely something that we're working on and thinking about interesting solutions. So that's really probably the aim for 2018 for us.
Yeah. Well, all good. All right. There's a question, what's the best way to get in touch with the panel on Tech for Good projects? So if anybody here wants to help you guys, what should I do?
LinkedIn.
Well, actually, we've got a booth, I think. So literally come and see me or my colleague Liv, who's at the back of the room, so you can come and have a chat afterwards if you like.
My office manager just printed me 500 business cards. So please come get my business card. I would love to hear from you.
To add a full range of answers, I would go Twitter, and you have it because it's my full name, which is in the program. Just tweet me.
All right, some really good advice. Yeah, thank you very much for this insight, and thanks for everybody to be here. Thank you.